What do lion's mane mushroom, computer games, and dance have to do together? Isn't it fantastic how they can all help neuroplasticity, which is the growth and the connection of brain cells? Hello, my name is Dr. Barbara Kleeb, and this is the Polymath Perception podcast. Have you ever wondered how you can keep your brain fit and working at optimal level, or even increase your brain power? Are you somebody who is interested in learning about many subjects, going deep, and having big curiosity? Then you might be a polymath. Polymath comes from many learnings. If you love to learn a lot, you will find yourself aligned with Lee Sidebottom and me. And you will love this conversation. I have been working with polymaths for over 4 years now, helping them work and speak with ease, and have built the Networking Coffee, which is a wonderful space where we all meet each other. If you don't listen to this episode, you miss out on Lee's story, how he came to be a professional athlete and later turned to be one of the founders of Neurotracker. Listen till the end. Then you get to know more than 7 simple hacks how to increase your brain health and function. It's such a joy meeting polymaths, playing music, writing books, painting pictures, creating, discovering the truth with open hands, and presenting it bravely, like the jester to the king. When you're meeting a polymath, you're getting to know so many things. They have lived many lives within one lifetime, and they share their insights generously. It's so wonderful to be interviewing polymaths. Welcome to the Polymath Perception podcast. Today I have the joy of introducing to you Lee Sidebottom. Lee, can you tell us about your journey as a polymath, please?
Okay, sure. When I was at school, some of my best friends used to call me Spock, which is, even though I don't look like him, but I got it. But I was just always interested in a lot of different things, and also sort of broad range in terms of quite philosophical, I think, at a young age. Sometimes I walk around the streets wondering how big is the universe, what does time mean, stuff like that. And then I went through education, and I just, about 14, I just kind of decided to take up running. As you know, I played some sports. I wasn't very good at it, but I started training. Genetically, you can be a super responder, which I believe I am. Within a year, I went from being a nobody to topping the rankings for cross country in Great Britain for my age and track. So if that was it, then I was going to be a professional athlete. Until about 18 years old, I got a pretty serious injury from a fall. And that was kind of it. It was all sort of over in one go, which was just the way it was. And then I thought, maybe I better get to university, because I barely been doing any A-levels. I was doing A-levels, but I was really just training 3 times a day at 16 years old, which was like a full-time profession.
Yeah.
So I've got just enough to get onto like a HND, a High National Diploma in England, which was actually a really good course. I did it in leisure studies. I went from that and jumped on the last year of a degree in business management. I got an award for dissertation of the year, which was about flexible working practices. In the summertime, I worked as a rubbish bin collector, using what was called compulsory competitive tendering, where the government sells off public services, licensing them out, and they employ flexible working practices. So I was actually, experiencing it and actually got to write about it and do research sort of thing on it. And then I jumped onto a master's degree in business management, but it was sort of in the leisure and sort of tourism area, which is a bit more towards the human sciences. I decided I wanted to not live in England anymore, because in Manchester, I'm from Manchester. It's very dark, very cloudy. It's not my cup of tea. I'm more of a sunshine kind of guy. So I was just looking at opportunities to travel. Me and my partner got the opportunity to move to Hong Kong. So we went there for a couple of years. I've lived in about, I don't know how many countries, about 25 years, mostly around East Asia, but also New Zealand and all sorts of different places. So I've picked up bits of languages, but you don't really retain it because it all gets mixed up. Even Hong Kong is very different from mainland China,
Yeah.
versus Mandarin. I took China, which just blew my mind. It was absolutely fascinating life experience and the culture. My partner ended up with a job opportunity to move to Nanjing in China, which is like Beijing's the north capital, Nanjing's the south capital, massive mega city. I started teaching in the schools, took a job there, and luckily that went really well. Just a lot of success, moved to sort of a famous school in China called Nanjing Foreign Language School. Won't mean much to anybody outside China, but in China, they have like 1 million kids try to apply to get into the school. Not many max out the exam results, that they have to do a lottery for the ones that get the maximum. It's all free, except they let in a few students that don't have high enough grades, and they basically pay for the whole school. And that job was lucky because a lot of the students would go to Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge and stuff like that. I ended up teaching them. Sometimes they get accepted, so they actually quit doing normal school. They didn't even take exams. They'd already got a place in MIT or something. The chance to teach lectures on any subject I wanted. Did a lecture on lucid dreaming.
Wow.
It was cool.
Were you a lucid dream then?
Well, I practiced it. I'll tell you a very strange story. I gave a lecture with a big projector screen. I was trying to get into the fundamentals of the big problem with lucid dream is realizing that you're actually dreaming, because it's a very difficult thing to do. So I asked all the students, about 100, how do you know this is real? Knock on the table. And then I realized I was in a lucid dream. I woke up that morning, taught that lecture, and did exactly the same thing. I said, God's honest truth. And I had no clue in the dream, even though I practiced and learned the methods.
Groundhog Days.
Yeah. But I really enjoyed the freedom to teach through English, teach all sorts of different advanced subjects, stuff like that. And then I ended up teaching other foreign teachers and then teaching new teachers coming in from the British Council. And I had a few quite promising career opportunities, but I wasn't particularly interested in becoming the principal of a British sixth form school. At that time, I found I got another opportunity in Malaysia, so we moved there and I took up some teaching courses and did some stuff there. And out of the blue, in Malaysia, I got a call from a guy at Manchester United. There was a guy I did my internship with on my master's degree. He ran a sports gym because I'm sort of in the leisure area. So I did 6 months managing a sports gym to get experience to get a master's degree. It's quite unusual, but it was a vocational master's. I used to go back and see him, and he got a job coaching at Manchester United. So his two sons had played for the club. He was managing his own gym. His sons were incredibly fit, so they actually asked him to be the coach of players because they were so good. He rang me up out of the blue. I go back sometimes to do some sports science consultancy. I've designed pre-season training strategies, interviewed the players, get a whole new training paradigm from gym training. One day he rang me up out of the blue and said he had this epiphany that the best players in the world, the Ronaldos, have what he called rapid cognition. He used terms like quantum consciousness. They just have this ability to operate in the moment, like on another level. It's beyond human perception. There was a player called Ruud van Nistelrooy, who was the most prolific goal scorer for Manchester United at the time. He told Mick, the coach, that what he focused on doing in a game of football is just to physically get inside the penalty box area. And after that, it goes black. He doesn't remember anything. He just sees the ball in the back of the net. That's how he scored all his goals. And he was getting insights like that.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's well known in like tennis players, for example, the serve is so fast it can't be consciously perceived. So they have to learn how to anticipate it and read what's called biological motion perception, human movement cues to predict where it's going to go, because they cannot actually, they're not fast enough. Similar things in baseball. So you're talking very, very, very fast time scales. So he discovered this rapid cognition and used the key to like this sort of super elites. But he said, I understand what it is now, but I don't have a way to train it. So he just said to me, I'm sort of a science nerd geek. You have to go out and find something they could use. I did a lot of research, looked at computer gaming, contacted some different neuroscience leaders, stuff like that. But I just came across Neurotracker, which is in the background. This was 15 years ago. And that stood out by a mile as the most interesting.
What is Neurotracker?
It sounds and looks so simple, it's almost too stupid to be useful, but it is actually very effective. It's called three-dimensional multiple object tracking. The simplest analogy I can give is like the cups on a table. You shuffle something around and you have to pay attention to one, not get distracted by others or cards. Yeah. It's that, but you have 4 targets, the spheres, and they're mixed among another 4 spheres. You have to remember your 4 spheres specifically. They all move and mix up. They move around dynamically in 3D space. They collide, rebound, include each other. And you do that for 8 seconds at a certain speed, and you have to identify them. If you identify all 4 correctly, which involves distributing your attention, it's not easy. It's not like your eyes can follow them. You have to do it with your brain, segment it. It's like 4 different attentional tasks. You get them all correct, it speeds up. And the speed is a very sensitive sort of difficulty metric. And if you get them all correct again, for another 8 seconds of tracking, it speeds up logarithmically, so it jumps up a lot. Within 60 seconds, it finds what we call your speed threshold, at which you can track and do complex tasks, which relates very well to sort of real world functions directly, like driving skills, for example, navigating, playing sports. And then you do that 20 times over 6 minutes, and it will give you a score, which will be the maximum speed you get as a breaking point. And then also being at that breaking point for most of the session seems to be incredibly effective for eliciting a neuroplastic training response in the brain. With just 3 hours of training, there's been 120 different published studies, all by independent researchers, non-commercially funded, show that doing 3 hours of this task, you have to wear 3D glasses, you'll get robust improvements in high-level cognitive functions, very broad ones as well, because it's more like a top-down task where you're integrating a lot of different systems simultaneously. We get what we call near transfer, so high-level cognitive function improving. 2, we get far transfer, for example, improving passing decision-making accuracy in soccer, but even more strange things such as reducing fall risk in the elderly, dementia patients improving fine motor skills, which are considerable things. So we see holistic benefits through a very focused task of stimulating the brain in the right way, divided attention, 3-dimensional stimulation, peripheral vision, speed thresholds at exactly the right level. We get really nice effects. So that's the gist of it. We have other technologies. We're a tech transfer company, partnered with the Faubert Lab at the University of Montreal. We have several technologies and commercializing. Neurotracker is the main one commercialized. We have another one called Neurotuner, which is even stranger. It's where we use what we call stochastic resonance, which is a sensory noise. It can be auditory noise, it could be tactile, it could be visual. And it's done in such a way that it creates a certain pattern the brain finds difficult to figure out. And then we read biological signals of the individual. We can see the skin temperature change just by watching this. We adjust the stimulation to their optimal range. And once we trigger it, it's called the fulcrum principle, we trigger this stochastic resonance in the brain where it suddenly operates on a higher bandwidth for all sensory processing. You can see things you can see before, hear and feel things you couldn't feel before. So that's another technology we have, but that's more niche scientific stuff.
But it's not like an app that I can download on my phone and play with it and get
We haven't
built.
commercialized that one yet. We're still looking for high-level partners. Lots of discussions we're in, but it's ready. You can use it. Some test centers and places being put to use.
Do you know that when people need to stimulate the neuroplasticity, they can go to the crawling process? It helps kids with autism and all that stuff.
Right. Really, I think that one of the key insights in terms of neuroplasticity is you have to think about the brain being a system that essentially just receives ones and zeros through sensory signals, nerves firing on and off. It's like the Matrix, all this binary code coming in, and our brain reads all that like a computer reads code in lots of ways, and it seeks the patterns in those, and it models predictions of what those patterns can lead to, and that's the fundamental basis of how the brain builds reality through its own sort of pattern recognition system.
But why do the neurons grow if they're stimulated in the right way?
That's the key point. It's when there's something novel, something new, something to learn, to adapt to. Those are all triggers for neuroplasticity. And there's lots. So being socially interactive is great for neuroplasticity, doing exercise, learning a language, playing musical instrument, anything that involves some sort of novelty or challenge to the system. Yeah, but in this case with the Neurotuner, it's like hacking in almost like an emergency code to say there's something really important going in we can't predict. We need to step into gear and do everything. Usually it turns out that for optimal brain function, it's not rocket science. It's really all the things that are just generally good. Normal health and wellness will tend to be all very good for sort of brain health, neuroplasticity and neurogenesis.
I always imagine it's similar to the muscle. If you stress the muscle slightly, then it grows.
Muscles can be very, very dynamic. Yeah, and it's not necessarily the stress. There can be other ways to stimulate them to grow, but they take a long time. The brain can reorganize its neural network overnight. So you've got a particularly stimulating, intense day.
Okay.
When you go to sleep, you'll have memory consolidation. There's a lot of work done. There's even like cerebral fluid that flows to sort of clean the brain, heal it. So you can get adaptations on very short time scales.
This is the brain cell connections that are reorganized
Yeah,
the
so
muscle is kind
neuroplasticity is
of,
the wiring, and the
yeah.
wiring can spread out. You can have a multitude of wires coming from an individual neuron. You can grow new wires. Yeah, spread out and find meaningful connections. If they fire together, they wire together. If they get used, they start to stay. If not, they get pruned. The essential ingredient is that injection of novelty, challenge, difficult pattern to understand. But the other way it's different is that muscles kind of just grow in a simple way where they just become greater in quantity. But when you think about synapses, it's not necessarily the number of wires you have, it's the number of potential connections you can make through the network
Yes,
of
of
each
course.
wire. So
Yep.
you get an exponential effect with every individual new wire you put into the system, you know, it can connect.
Muscles can also grow in diameter, to kind of complete the sentence.
I'm not sure if individual muscle cells grow in mass or you just get more muscle cells.
You have to go to the books again.
Yeah, it'll be more muscle cells.
More muscle cells and stronger muscle cells. I mean, you can have more mitochondria as well.
In each cell?
In each cell, yeah. By training anything.
Yeah, or altitude training. Yeah.
What is the most astonishing thing that you've learned in your journey?
Maybe I'm brain geek, but I'll still say the hemispherectomy because it blows my mind. So that young children with epilepsy, if it's very severe, sometimes they have to have half of their brain cut out and removed. So left and right brain, they do very different things, but they're connected via the corpus callosum, and they're basically one system, so they talk, but it's two very functionally different systems that are intertwined, if you like. So if you remove half of one, you should have lost already half the movement in your body, a lot of organ functions, and never mind everything to do with emotions and the complexity of brain consciousness. But going in and physically removing up to a certain age, and then it's not possible to recover, physically removing half the brain in one go, literally cutting it out, very quickly, the other side of the brain rewires itself into a whole new left-right brain system. And those children grow up to live with fairly normal lives, you know, a little bit of motor skill challenges, but normal intelligence, which is incredible. Because for that to occur, the information has to be stored in that system to be ready to adapt to a massive change. The morphology of it is absolutely phenomenal. It's a bit like a caterpillar changing into a butterfly, you know, it turns to liquid goo, reconstructs itself. So that flexibility is just absolutely mind-blowing. There was a case of a guy who had a fluid disease which built up and actually compressed his brain from the inside out. So it's just a very thin layer that we basically had an empty skull, and he had slightly lower than average intelligence, but otherwise he lived a normal life. It wasn't discovered until very late on. He had less than 10% of his actual brain. I know there's a myth about you only use 10% of your brain, but you lose 10% of the mass of what is that 10% adapted to do pretty much everything a normal human being can do, which is mind-blowing, yeah.
So what is your field of working now? You're working with Neurotracker, or do you do different things?
So it's primarily Neurotracker, so the technology. So I kind of I do a bit of everything, but I'm acting also, so a fairly small team still. But the main area that's kind of interesting is being able to consult for people using Neurotracker for research or industry validation. So you get to conversations. Sometimes it's like, you know, military generals. I've worked with like Red Bull F1 team, which was weird going in there because that's another world, like the security and stuff. We did a project with the United States Air Force to half the time it takes to graduate new Top Guns. We tend to consult for all these different, really interesting people. And they all seem to be super nice because they have a bit of niche knowledge in a certain area that they really want to learn. They've all been a dream. And also researchers in universities and academic researchers across the board. Yeah, lots of interesting conversations.
Do you have any PhDs or doctorates or something like this?
Don't.
Has this ever been hindering you for being seen as brilliant?
It's the weirdest thing. Yeah, it's never come up. And it's probably one of the first people to actually ask me that. It's usually me telling somebody else, look, I'm not a doctor, I don't have a PhD. But no, I don't. I did actually, I was lucky enough to co-write like the first sort of foundational Neurotracker paper for sports science. How do you apply cognitive training to sports science? And that turned out to be quite a landmark paper because it was a new domain at the time. And the professor invented Neurotracker helped write with it, but I didn't expect to put my name on the paper, but he insisted, even though it was just master's degree in business, But it turns out that's been wildly cited. So it's strange. I see my name come up in a lot of the papers that I read, hundreds of papers. I'm actually getting cited, which is a bit weird because I don't have a PhD. My expertise is really quite specific. It's fairly niche. I'm a generalist, but in terms of Neurotracker, it's psychophysics area of neuroscience, and it's mostly focused around the technology. But there's not many people who know it, and it's kind of grown into its own field, if you like. So the 120 papers that have come out, they're growing in diversity and they're growing sort of exponentially. So yeah, you probably need to train other people up to help consult.
What other areas are you moving yourself in?
Well, I'm interested in AI tools, but I'm not putting to use. I'm kind of just exploring them and trying them out in different ways of productivity applications. But I'm really interested in where they'll go. And there's quite a few people who are on the frontiers of sort of AI development, put them to real world use, become friends with. So that's kind of an interesting area. I love nature. I'm currently working more on the sort of meditation side of how to biological and psychological, but there's times when I can get into nature and I just seem to get into a state of overwhelming gratitude. Everything around me looks phenomenal. Hike with my dogs. There seems to be a certain recipe to that. Be walking for a certain amount of time, it's the right weather, it's the right time of day to find somewhere where everything's beautiful, nature, dragonflies flying around. So that I've been kind of exploring. And on aside from that, I've been experimenting with psilocybin, the magic mushroom. Only microdosing in tiny doses because I have Lyme disease. I haven't really had many effects for it because the doses are too small. Yep. It's legal to take here in Spain. I had phenomenal success with it for about 6 months, almost completely removed Lyme symptoms. But then the last 6 months, it seems to have worn off. Sometimes in those sort of nature experiences, I felt like I was tapping into a little bit of connecting or oneness. Because I only read about, the experience they induce. But I'm interested in them cognitively because your brain switches from very short range communication to sort of long range. Areas the brain get to talk to each other, never met each other before. That's the psychedelic experience. But it doesn't have to be triggered by psychedelics. Meditators, monks and Buddhists show they can, get into these sort of states, if you like, that equivalent to psychedelics. Yeah. And then generally I just follow quantum physics, anything to do with natural sciences.
You sent me a picture with your dogs, so you have the eye for photography.
The pictures take themselves usually.
You have to see it.
I've noticed that you can be in various places you've been before, some places, but experience them in a slightly different way, and suddenly they can see more beautifully before. Sometimes that's true.
I find a daily dose of awe is a good practice, where you can extend your mind and have what you called it oneness, but it goes into this direction.
Yeah, and it's just great as well at a basic sort of biological level to get exposed to sunlight, which you generally don't do. So our retinas stimulate hormones based off the light frequencies they're getting, which are nothing like that inside with artificial lighting. We've got receptors in our skin that actually convert molecules triggered and released when they receive a certain amount of sunlight. They actually go around and clean the arteries and actually reduce the chances of heart disease. And then we synthesize the most important vitamin in the body, vitamin D, which has done a whole host of disease prevention things. And if you don't get enough of it, you get serious health effects very quickly. So just the exposure to being outside in the sense of space, I think you're already off at a good level. And if you're doing exercise as well, and
yes,
enjoying it, the fresh air.
Yeah, I think it's also, I don't know. I know quite a lot about mitochondria, or I have been into this field, and I think it's a communicative system within the body that delivers our energy. But it's also communicating with the sun and the bacteria and stuff like this. So
exactly, yeah. Traditional sort of biological view is very reductionist, focused on every little interaction of the molecule, but really what everything's been finding in biology and neuroscience in the last 10 years at least, all the interesting stuff is to do with synergistic effects. You need a system science perspective. If you want to look at, for example, the heart and the brain, it's been found there's really strong bi-directional interplay between the two. So the state of the heart, which has a mini brain, by the way, of about 40,000 neurons, It can actually control what you're thinking and feeling. It can have direct influences, and it can go the other way too. So you can actually, have a stroke, and because of how it can change the lining of muscles of the heart, that can actually induce a stroke in the brain as a knock-on effect. So there's sort of a feedback loop there. So yeah, and that's a very simple system. I mean, when you get into the gut brain axis, you've got something enormously more complex, but that's another system. And then what we seem to find is all these different systems seem to be interrelated, and they're all cybernetic feedback loops. That's where the complexity arrives. I think we need that type of understanding before we can get near tackling what consciousness is, because you can't understand the complex emergence at the basic biological level, then consciousness as the hard problem is a much bigger jump.
So do you think we think in the brain?
So we definitely have. So I'm actually kind of convinced, even on an experiential level, that the gut can control your thinking. You can modulate your own thoughts by the stimulation you put in your gut, and it's quite a quick response. It depends on what you respond to. The obvious answer would be all thoughts are generated in the brain. But the brain does a lot of stuff. It's a very complex system. It does a lot of the most sophisticated stuff. And really the most important thing is the neocortex. That's like a tablecloth about that thickness. Stacks of neurons that are very specialized, about the size of a grain of rice, but they're very powerful. Each individual one is essentially a mini brain. It can compute and model really complex objects in the world, figure them out, pattern recognition, as well as learning from sensory data. So that's what we would more associate with consciousness and our high level thinking are things like organizing, planning, thinking forward. But a lot of sort of experiential stuff, I think there's a strong case to be made that you have to look at the whole as an information processing system. There are neuroscientists who argue this. You could never have a brain in a jar. You have to simulate the whole system to be able to get the complexity you need for the brain to function. The whole feedback system is not an isolated entity, if you like.
And where is the seat of our wisdom?
So that's an interesting question, because really when you look at wisdom, you predict in the future as pattern recognition, but to predict the future, you have to base it off the knowledge that you've accumulated from past experiences. If you want to, the wiser you want to be, the vaster your knowledge base should be to draw on to predict the future. For the goals that you want to be wise towards, if you want to be kinder, more heartfelt, more generous, whatever it is, you still have to put the time and thought into processing the knowledge to actually figure out what is the best way for me to be or for things to pan out in a complex situation. I think the seat of wisdom is the will to actually reflect and introspect and think deeply about complex subjects. And out of that, you can get wisdom arise and emergent effect.
I have like an inner voice, and I learned to really listen to it.
Yeah.
I did gynecology and helped babies, and you have the observation tool there is a CTG. It's 50% accurate. So I needed something more. I needed to listen to the wise inner voice, which I can sense somewhere in the heart space. You already said we have nerves there. And whenever I listen, stuff turns out exactly right. If I don't listen, I can do something wrong.
Yeah, it's such an interesting subject. I mean, where the thoughts come from and who controls what thoughts, and you see yourself who's, leading the dialogue. But it is, and I struggle with this, it is very difficult to focus on thinking without doing it subconsciously as verbal language that you're actually, auditorily sort of hallucinating your own voice. And it's very difficult to think meaningfully or functionally about anything without that voice narrating. In Buddhist mantras or things like that, the idea of losing self or losing the voice is when you get to the more interesting stuff. I feel sometimes that we get exposed so much to language that it interferes with our ability to think. So actually quieting it down is where you actually give some breathing room. There are other techniques to suddenly, instead of what you're concentrating on, start do something completely different, completely distracts. There's these cases of, the sort of conscious mind being busy and wanting to do this and giving the unconscious mind some breathing room. So distract the conscious mind and let the unconscious mind give it a bit more bandwidth. But yeah, methods to control or get the optimal balance between that sort of structured inner voice And again, we can get into hemispheric science here because it's the very sort of left-brained dominant thinking. The right brain's much more emotional, which is much more difficult to put into language. It can be done, but it tends to be more artistic. There are hemispheric scientists who argue strongly that there's an imbalance and we need to quieten down the sort of the rational part of the brain. And interestingly, in epilepsy, you can actually cut the brain and leave it cut. So you actually have two separate halves, but they cannot talk to each other. So this is interesting because you get to look at each brain as a separate brain and see how it functions. So actually there are cases where split brain patients actually have a war going on with each brain. It's like wanting to do something different, literally like picking up a phone and the other hand grabbing it and slamming it down. There was even a case of a person who one hand was trying to strangle himself and the other hand was trying to fight it away.
Do we know something about monks' brains? People who meditate a lot?
Yeah, they've been studied quite a lot, actually. There's a bit of a staff pupil in neuroscience, human neuroscience studies of the brain and mindfulness. So it's really, a lot of it was to do literally to see if what they claimed was true. So, for example, there are Tibetan monks who practice the art of putting cold, wet cloths on their skin, and then they control the temperature of their skin to sort of superheat it to dry the cloths up. So, you know, claims like that, and lots of other ones as well, but claims like that were tested and scientifically validated. And there was fMRI research done. There's a monk called Matthieu Ricard, a French monk. He's a Tibetan monk. He's led a lot of the research. But yeah, they've looked at the neural correlates. There are funky things going on inside the brain, similar to psychedelic states. So they are actually able to do it. The interesting thing is the mastery of their control, their sublime of attentional focus, the control of their will to do things really quickly. There are even stories of mindfulness masters who can voluntarily die and then revive themselves, which is at the extreme length. It's doable in principle. You'd never get ethics review to study something like that. But it's that extreme control. It's not special about the individuals. It's literally through training and discipline, but obviously decades of training. They're fascinating.
Soon, Lee Sidebottom will tell you 7 brain hack tips. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot about brain, resilience, and polymathy. Knowing about it is one thing, but applying is another thing. So if you want to know more and experience more about polymathy, the superpowers, the challenges, and how to deal with them, you have the possibility to book half an hour call with me. If you don't do that, you can spend all the time on the internet and research it for yourself, which is another possibility. But you miss on picking my brain, so please go to the show notes and book half an hour slot in my Calendly. Scroll to the text, find the Calendly link, inscribe your name, email address, and pick a time. And I will see you soon for a fun conversation. And now we come to the 7 tips of increasing your brain power. Lee, take it.
Yeah, exercise. So you look at a psychological experience, but mainly biological. Just the stimulation of exercise can trigger neurogenesis, great for neuroplasticity, oxygenates the body. And number 2 would be sleep. It's not only memory consolidation, it's also the sort of cleaning of the brain and removing waste products. And obviously, you go without sleep, it gets pretty bad pretty quick, but obviously the reverse is true. If you get the sleep you need, you can improve and recover very quickly. Diet, there are some sort of outstanding ones, such as omega-3 oils. Probably the most scientifically validated is omega-3 oils, and integral to our evolution throughout Scandinavia, by the way. But also lion's mane mushroom has been found to be a powerful stimulator of neurogenesis, which is particularly important, you know, growing as we get older, because neurogenesis helps repair parts of the brain that can become damaged or impaired. And then music, which I would actually throw in dance there. You're getting multi-sensory stimulation. When you combine we still don't really understand music, but we know it evokes powerful responses in the brain, and it significantly affects our mood, and there's significant complexity that our brain seems to like. Adding dance, we've got all the motor complexity on top of it. And then focused brain training exercises, I would say. Sudoku and cryptic crossword, which I particularly like, tend to be narrow focused, but doing specific exercise that involved a high load of processing. Computer games are actually very good. you know, not too much, obviously, but actually get you to process a large amount of information, take sensory input, and usually make complex decisions, and they tend to adapt to your needs.
Yeah, the computer game kids are much better in laparoscopy.
It's true. There's a Neurotracker study on that, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, the Neurotracker helps with laparoscopy too. Oxygenation is another factor. It's generally not well understood, but inside buildings, they're typically not well ventilated at all. And you get a lot of particles and other things in there that can actually influence the quality of the brain, but also lower the levels of oxygen. So having open windows and also going outside to exercise. And then we can look at stimulants, I guess. There is a role for these. Nicotine, actually, it's a bad word to say, but you can take the natural form, which is very different from in cigarettes. But that's been shown to be really good for heightening focus, things like that. And lots of other supplements that you can take. They could be ginseng or, you know, a combination of many that are safe and relatively effective. But when you're actually stimulating the brain like that, you see an increase generally, as long as you're not stressed or too stressed. It's generally been good for your brain because you get more activity and more exercise if you like. So it's going to be in a more plastic state. What's that? Is that 6?
8.
Oh, okay. I'll leave it at that.
Meditation we already
were discussing
mentioned.
that, yeah.
I think you can behave like a kid.
Yeah.
Doing stuff that a kid
The
does.
novelty, the fun, the excitement, anything that involves laughing.
Playing,
Comedy is
laughing,
pretty good. Yeah, comedy.
goofing, yes.
It's a complex thing to make you to physically laugh. And if you're watching a stand-up or a comedy show, that gets you to literally laugh out loud. That's evoking a powerful reaction. It's kind of like the equivalent of getting you to cry in an emotional or sentimental film. But that's a big activity, you know, so the brain waves, you'd be looking at a surge. So yeah, that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lee. It was so much fun to talk to you.
And likewise, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.